hope you're on your toes today because I have a few questions to ask you. First of all, I'll read the question, then I'll read the three answers, and you choose which one is correct. The first question is, what was the liquid dripping from the tree? Was it A, water, B, sap, or C, sugar? If you chose B, your answer is correct. I wonder how many of you got it right. For the second question, the question is, what connection, if any, is there between this syrup and the sap coming from the tree? And the answers, A, they are the same, B, there's no connection, and C, the syrup is a product of the sap. If you chose C, then you are correct. The maple syrup that we use on pancakes and other delicious foods is a direct product of the sap. It starts out as the watery sap of the maple tree. And for the third and final question, listen carefully. Which people are called the first maple sugar makers? Is it A, the Indians, B, the French, or C, the Dutch? If you chose A, your answer is correct. I hope you got 100% on our little quiz. Before the settlers came to this continent, the Indian people were harvesting the maple sap from the maple tree. The maple sugar harvest was a direct sign that winter was over and spring was quickly coming on its way. It was a time for celebration for many tribes. Because of the severe winters that they faced, spring was always a pleasant time of year. And today, to help us discover some of the maple sugar secrets is Mr. Ted Bogda from Cass Lake. Mr. Bogda narrates a slide presentation that tells us the story of the maple sugar harvest. Mr. Bogda, we're really glad you could be with us today, and I'm glad that you took the time to drive all the way from Cass Lake to be here.
Thank you. The portion of the slides that you just saw is the old way that the Indian used to maple harvest, just hitting the tree with an axe, putting a slide, putting a slash into the tree, and this then would drip out into a birch basket. Now, maple sugaring starts at about March 30th, and it'll run around a month. It'll go from about last part of March to about the 30th of April. The first thing that we have to do is clean out the cans. Now, in the old picture that you saw there, they used birch baskets. Today, they use tin cans, and the first thing that we do is wash them out. Boil water, put it in, and get the cans clean to collect the syrup. After we've washed the cans out, we also have to get our camp ready, which consists of a couple poles which we use as cross pieces to hang the boiling cans on, which you'll see later on in the slide presentation. Here's a good shot of what the maple camp would look like. Now, nowadays, we don't go into the woods and live out there. 10, 15 years ago, the people used to go out and stay right into the maple camp, build a little hut out there, and live for about 30 or 40 days while the maple harvest was going on. The tools for maple syruping are an axe, a drill, a small can for collecting the syrup on a tree, a large can for collecting the syrup to bring back to the camp, and spigots, which we put into the trees so that the sap will run out of. This is what your maple sugar grove will look like in the springtime. This is just after the snow has melted. You can see some of the cans that are hanging on the trees. This is a close-up of the can hanging on the tree. And the top of the can, you'll see a little thing coming out of the tree. That's what we call a spigot. Now they're made out of metal. Years ago, Before metal was here, they used to whittle out a piece of wood and put a hole through it and drive that into the tree. Now the first thing that we have to do then, once the once we have the cans clean, is go out and put the cans onto the trees to collect the sap. Here we see some of our youngsters, part of my family and my brother-in-law's family, going out to put cans on the tree. The first thing that we have to do is drill a hole in the tree so that we can put the spigot in. Here young Steve Humphrey is drilling a hole into the tree. Here he is continuing to drill the hole to put the can. In the foreground you can see a can, and he's going to put another can on it right next to it. Some of the trees will have up to 5 or 6 cans. If they're large, if they're small trees, we only put 1 or 2. His sister, Wallace Humphrey, is hammering the spigot into the tree.
Pardon me, there's a job for every member of the family then in the maple sugar harvest.
This is very true. What we do is we take our whole family out, and even the youngsters, 3 and 4 years old, help by mostly collecting the syrup. Now, when they get, like Wallace is in 3rd grade, she can, her and her brother can actually help out by putting taps in.
Mm-hmm.
Once we get the cans hung on the tree, the next job is to collect some wood. Here my wife and young daughter are going out to saw up some wood and bring it back to the camp. Once we get the wood back at the camp, we have to start using the axe, as you can see in the background, splitting it up so that we can build a fire. After about a day of hanging on the tree, the sap will drip out, and we have to collect the sap. Now, in the beginning, it doesn't run too fast. As the weather warms up, the sap will start running, and we'll have to collect about 3 times a day, morning, noon, and just before dark. We bring it back into the camp, and as you can see, there's boiling cans hanging over the fire. What we do is we pour the sap into the cans, and we boil it down. It takes about 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. Here you can see Wallace Humphrey pouring some of the sap into the boiling cans. One of the probably the most horrible job is keeping a fire going. This means that we have to take a lot of wood, get a lot of wood out. We got to keep that fire going so that the sap will continue to boil down. As the sap boils down, we keep on adding more sap into the boiling cans and keep on boiling it. As you can see, the steam will come out and the water then goes into the air as a gas, and then the syrup will be left into the can. Now, once the sap gets down, you really got to watch that it doesn't boil over so that you lose the maple syrup. And here you can see 2 of us hanging on the cans with a piece of wood. If it starts to boil over, we pull it out of the fire. As soon as it goes down, we put it back in. Here's a nice shot showing the sap boiling. We use 8 cans. You can actually use as many as you want. Now we stay out there all day. Of course, you have to eat, and the nice thing to do is have a nice deer roast hanging on a fire, and this is what we're doing right here. We eat our meals right out there, and we work all day and most of the evening. This is showing us going in the evening. Sometimes we'll stay out there all night, although we usually don't. Now this is the last finished product of the maple syrup. This is what it'll look like after we get done boiling it. Then what we do is we bring it into our house, boil it on the stove. Now we clean it out by simply bringing it to a boil on the stove, putting a raw egg in it. The egg will pick up all the dirt and anything else that are in it, and then we just scoop the egg out, and we have clean maple syrup, and this then will be the syrup that you would use on your pancakes.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today. I noticed that you brought some old-fashioned spigots with you.
Yes, these are some that I pulled out of the tree. I don't know if you can get a close-up here, but what they are is just a small spigot carved out of a piece of wood with a hole put into it. And these are what the Indian used to use before the metal came into being. A few of them still use them up in the area.
And you also brought some syrup. This is what the syrup looks like.
This is what I use baby can jars to can it with.
That's fine. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm sure the students enjoyed your presentation very much. And as an extra treat today, I asked Mrs. White Rabbit to come to show us some of the ways you can use maple sugar and maple syrup in cooking. And right now I'd like to go to Mrs. White Rabbit to show you some of the foods that she's brought with her. Mrs. White Rabbit?
Thank you, Jennifer. First of all, we have some dried fruit. And this is dipped in maple syrup, and the maple syrup has been boiled to a soft boil stage, and then the fruit has been dipped into it and drained
And
on
these
paper.
are prunes?
Prunes, walnut halves, and apricots.
Oh, and they're delicious. I tasted the walnut halves before the program today, and they were very good.
Thank you.
And what's next?
Oh, and then what we, the syrup that it's cooked in, we saved it and we added it to the Indian corn pudding. And this is made with cornmeal, and it tastes exactly like rice pudding. And it's made similar with raisins and your scalded milk and your spices. Next, we have corn meal bread. This is made out of cornmeal, and there's nothing as delicious as taking maple syrup and putting it onto the,
The
the
top
seal
stop.
is still on. Yeah, good. Putting it right over the cornbread, and this is certainly a delicious
Maybe
treat.
I could taste that.
Oh,
It
surely.
looks so good. And it's regular cornbread.
Yes, It's made with cornmeal, and corn is a real good food. Many of the Indians use corn in their cooking. This is acorn squash, and instead of putting regular syrup in, we put butter in and maple syrup.
Very good. And Mrs. White Rabbit works for the University of Minnesota.
Yes.
And what is your job there?
I'm an extension worker for the university, and I work with Indian people on foods and nutrition in St. Paul.
That sounds very interesting. What kinds of things do you do?
Well, there's just about any limited of things that we can do. We can help on budgeting and cooking and shopping, things like that.
Oh, and you brought so many recipes with you
Thank you.
that I'm sure some of our viewers would like to have for their own. Perhaps that you could give the recipe to me and they could write in to get some of them.
That would be fine.
Everything looks so tasty. One last thing that you brought with you was fry bread. I recognize that from our series last year.
There's two different kinds here. One is made with baking powder, and the other is made with yeast, and it's fried in deep fat.
If you'd like to go over to demonstrate how you make the fried bread, I'd like to show the students an overall view of what you brought with you.
And this is also good with maple syrup.
Maybe
Lots
I'll
of
try
people dip the bread into maple syrup.
Okay, we'll see you in a few minutes. Everything but I don't know what to eat first. Maybe some of you would like to try some of these recipes in your classrooms. The dried fruit would be very easy to try. If your teacher could get a hold of some maple syrup, all you'd have to do is dip the fruit into the syrup. And also the cornbread and the fry bread. I imagine that maple syrup would be very tasty on regular bread too. Well, I also have here some maple sugar in the sugar form. It's granulated. Whoops. And it's much like brown sugar, only it's a little more coarse and tastes very good. I think Mrs. White Rabbit is ready now to show us what it takes to make the fry bread. Mrs. White Rabbit?
Thank you. Before we start, I want to show you the baskets. These are Winnebago baskets, and they're made in Wisconsin. They're all made by hand, and they're made with black ash wood, and the men cut the wood and pound the logs, and they come off in layers like the growth of the, the years of the growth of the tree. The men also carve the handles, and the handles are all
They're very
carved,
beautiful.
and they fit in, and the women do the dyeing and the weaving.
I bet they really come in handy too.
Yes. There's two different kinds of fry bread here. One is made with yeast, and the other is made with baking powder. First of all, we get our grease nice and hot, and then we take, I'd say about that much. And then we dip it in the flour.
In the flour.
And we get our hands nice and floury, and we mold it into a round disc shape. Some of the older women can flop them back and forth, but I can't. And so I mold them like this to get the dough even around.
And then you put it into a deep fryer.
Deep fryer. And then we let it raise. Now, the reason I do that is so it gets evenly cooked.
And about how long does it take to cook in the
Just a
grease?
few minutes when it's hot.
Oh,
Now,
I
this
see.
should be just a little hotter to start.
It would boil up.
Yes, because if the grease is too cold, then the grease will absorb in the dough. And it's supposed to rise right to the top as soon as you put it in.
And that's how you can tell whether it's getting done?
Right.
I see.
So the first one isn't going to be too good because the grease isn't hot enough.
Maybe we should turn up the oven a little. There. Now that should make it a little higher. Yes, I
Good.
put it on high.
Good.
It would naturally go on high, so the grease would be pretty hot before you get
Yes.
started.
Yes. And it doesn't take long, just a few minutes on one side when your grease is good and hot.
And after it's done, you can either sprinkle maple sugar on it or dip it in maple syrup.
Right.
One or the other. It's very good
And
too.
also it could be buttered.
Well, I'm glad that you could be with us today, Mrs. White
Thank
Rabbit.
you very
Everything
much,
was so
Jennifer.
good. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Bogda for bringing his slides from Cass Lake. It's been fun, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Hunter Jaske, Chegrig, one sugar, when you should have get trusting his game on the action. I go near it.
Waga ник чангre ro ha chinde ske keep as ni
After igi jagui ungshna igi wajiske choaching jaske wangshigre jaske hire shuna igi jago wine shuna eske choaching jakshi perezekshna de go pi eske shuna iguni are
what shirikshin ske nik changre
ja de jago jaske chegrige jago wine shuna igi wage hainga igi iragaje washirikshna guri are igi ge choaching igi nampa igi ge eske wagi pakshna igi jaske wa wine shuna eske ge eske je wa agi akshna igi hinuk igi wanga gijre na ina ga igi jakshi keje ujin perezne ona igi
I'd like you to meet two friends of mine. First, on my far left, Mr. Barry Blackhawk, who is a teacher from the Minneapolis Public School. Mr. Blackhawk teaches an English class and also an Indian culture class at North High School in Minneapolis. And in the middle, we have Mr. Henry Green Crow, who works for the Minnesota Indian Affairs Commission, and he's also available to talk to public school students whose teachers contact him about his people. When you tuned in, you heard them speaking the Winnebago language. Mr. Green Crow and Mr. Blackhawk both were raised speaking the Winnebago language before they learned English, so English had become a second language for them. I bet if you check in your classrooms, you can find about 2 or 3 children who speak a language other than English. So English became a second language for these people, as they did for many people who are in Minnesota. Today, Mr. Blackhawk is going to tell us a little more about the Winnebago people and the history of his people. Mr. Blackhawk?
Thank you, Jennifer. I'd like to start out by saying that the Winnebago people, in recorded history, the first contact that they ever had with the white man was in 1634, which is quite a long time ago. They were first known to exist around the area, and if you'll check the map over here, I have a map that we'll try to point out to you. In the Green Bay area, in this area, right here by the Great Lakes, and this is located in Wisconsin, as you can see. Now, the Winnebagos have always lived in Wisconsin, all through this area, northern Illinois, and northeast Iowa, and some into southern Minnesota. And they were in this area a great deal, living for a long time. Now, before that time, it is not known where the Winnebagos had come from. Perhaps they had come from around the Great Lakes from the eastern part, or perhaps up and through here. And it is not really known where the Winnebagos had come from before that. But the first treaty that they had was in 1816. They formed a treaty of peace. It's called the Treaty of Peace with the United States government, because the Winnebagos had fought against the United States in the British wars and the War of 1812 and the French and Indian Wars. They fought on the British side against the United States. And so the United States had to have a treaty of peace with the Winnebago Indians. In 1816, they formed a treaty of peace so that the people in this area could be at peace with the United States. Now, in 1825, this area, as you see right through here, that's got all these lines in it, was a treaty that was made in 1825 where the United States wanted to put the Indians in certain areas so that we knew what Indians owned what land. Now, the Menominees and the Chippewas lived up here, and the Sac and Fox were down here, and Ottawas and the Kansas, various areas, so that and this is where the lands that the Winnebagos were supposed to have lived in after the 1825 treaty. Now, in 1829, which wasn't too long after that, the Winnebagos had to give up some of their land. They gave up this much land right here. They gave that land in 1829. Now, in 1832, they had to give up some more land because there were settlers moving in here. There's white settlers coming into Minnesota and up through here, so that there was settlement had to be going on, and the Indians had to be moved out. Now, in 1837, all the land east of the Mississippi was given up and was sold and acquired by the United States. And as you see the arrow moving up here, up in central Minnesota is where the Winnebagos lived in 1837. Now, they had a big reservation there, and the Winnebagos were in a neutral ground, a neutral zone, where they acted as a buffer between the Chippewas and the Sioux in this area. And so in 1846, they moved to this area down by Mankato, Minnesota. And they lived there for a number of years. When the Sioux outbreak came, the people in that county told these people to move out. They had to have them move out because they wanted the land, and they were afraid that they were uprising with the Sioux. And in 1855, they moved out to Fort Thompson, South Dakota, down in this area. And then in 1859, they gave up the land here, they gave up the land here. And in 1863 and 65, they moved down where they're in the present location in Winnebago, Nebraska. Now, let me point out that each time these Winnebagos moved to a certain area, many Indians went back to Wisconsin and lived. They always went back to Wisconsin and lived, so that the government tried to make them stay in these areas, but they always went back to their ancestral homelands in Wisconsin. And today you will find a group of people living here and a group of people living in Wisconsin yet to this day. The Reservation Business Committee, the Wisconsin Business Committee runs the affairs of the Winnebagos here, and we have a tribal council down in Nebraska. And we find Winnebagos all over the country, in Minneapolis and all parts of the country where Winnebagos live. So to this day, the history of the Winnebago continues on, and there will be many times where Winnebagos will be in urban areas. And I think there's also a book available on the Winnebagos if anybody's interested in reading a book like this. It's called The Winnebago Tribe, and it has a long history to them.
Thank you, Mr. Blackhawk. The information you have given us is very valuable, and I'm sure that the students would like to expand upon it in their classrooms or perhaps at home. They may contact the Indian Center in St. Paul for more information. They also may go to their public libraries. Mr. Blackhawk, could you tell us a little about the clan, the way that Winnebago people were divided into clans, if they were?
The Winnebagos were divided into about 7 or 8 clans, depending on which way, who is telling about it. Now, the clans had special privileges and had special responsibilities within the tribe, and the way the tribe would put their camps would be a good illustration of what clan had what responsibility. And some of the clans would provide the leaders, and some of the clans would provide warriors, and some of the clans would provide the skills, different skills that were necessary in the tribe. So that's the kind of government that they had.
All right, we've learned today a little about the Winnebago people, the history, about how they migrated from Wisconsin through Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska. And we also have learned that they were divided into clans. Now, each clan was very skillful in making beautiful artifacts. Some of the things were very practical and necessary for their everyday life, and other things were just for pure entertainment. And Mr. Greencrow is with us again today to tell us and show us some of the many artifacts of the Winnebago people. Mr. Greencrow?
Yes. I brought along some beadwork and some of the articles that the Winnebago tribe had years ago and also are attempting to carry on today. Very briefly, we'll go into the designs, the beadwork, of course, a little bit about beadwork. The beads, of course, Winnebagos never had them until the white settlers came to our country shortly after Columbus's time. And before that, we had other types of clothing, which I'll go into here shortly. Each one of these designs that you see here signify a star. You can see the 4 points in the different colors. Also, we have here a floral arrangement, also in straight lines. I should explain probably to you people and your children. The Winnebagos are from the woodland group of Indians, so therefore a lot of their designs are from floral and have round designs, but the Plains Indians, of which the Sioux, the Dakota tribe is in, used straight geometric lines in many of their beadwork, such as if I might move to the left here a little bit, as you might see on this particular piece, you have a triangle type design with these square blocks in it, and this is typical of the Sioux type beadwork. But getting back again over here, if I might start on this end, is a cradle board. It's called a cradle board, and the children used to sleep in these whenever they slept. And here's the woodland type of design that I was speaking of. You see the round flowers with the stems, and this is very typical of the beadwork that the Winnebagos made. Now here we have a belt with a beading, identical type design with the other part that is in the front. Here we have an eagle feather fan. The eagle among the Winnebagos is considered the highest creature in our Great Spirit's kingdom. They believe that he flies the highest among all the creatures, so for this reason they consider him quite highly, being also the symbol of our country. The two pieces on the end here are made out of deer skin, Indian tanned. This is a legging, half leggings they are called. They're worn around the knee. They used to be worn primarily in warm weather, summertime when it was nice and cool out. During the winter time we had what they call full leggings, which are like a regular pair of trousers. On the end we have breechcloth with some beadwork from the Winnebagos, the typical Winnebago design here. We have a flower with the leaves, again on this end, and again here's the straight geometric lines. Now the Winnebagos, like I say, we're from the Siouan family. Many of our words are the same. Many of the colors, the basic words are the same as the Sioux, but however, there are language differences. On the end here we have a basket that is made by Winnebagos. It's made out of black ash. There are many man-hours in it. The strips are cut in smaller strips. You can see the wide ones here. Each time each part of it's made out of a smaller length. It also comes in different colors. And here's the one that is finished. This one's about halfway. This one's pretty much close to being finished. There's another band that grows around the outside here, and plus a little handle goes on the top.
What did you call the material here?
It's made out of black ash. It's cut in logs, I suppose, that are a foot in diameter or so when they're cut. This is pretty much what I brought along with me here. I would, at this point, like to go into the Winnebago tribe a little bit, and it's some of its dances and some of its costuming also, and also its religion. There are two basic Indian religions among the Winnebago. One, of course, is the Medicine Lodge, and the other is the Native American Church. And I believe they coincide with the other tribes. We have our own, what the non-Indians would call God. We call him the Great Spirit. Among the Winnebagos, we call him Mauna, which is the Earth Maker. I think as in past programs, Mr. Maga has been here. He talked about the Sioux, and they call him Wakantaka, which means the Holy One. And among the Chippewas, of course, you have the Medewan, which they call him Gishimanidu, which is also the same thing. So all Indians had a religion. They believed in a Great Spirit. They believed that there was one that had superior abilities and created all of us. I think I would say that much about our Winnebago people. I'm going to describe also a little further one of our dances, and I'll introduce our dancers.
Good.
And we'll be putting on a small dance here. We had many dances, which I'm sure Ginger here will go into.
Thank you very much. As you heard Mr. Green Crow say, the Winnebago people use dancing in several areas. First of all, there are ceremonial dances which were sacred to the Winnebago and which non-Indians could not view or not participate in. Perhaps some of you have attended Indian powwows here in St. Paul at the YMCA. And during those times, many non-Indians are allowed to participate in the dances. There are sacred dances that non-Indians are not allowed to see, which would be birth dances, death dances, dances of that nature. but there are also social dances which many people are allowed to take part in, and they would be welcoming dances, and that's one of the dances we're going to see today. For a real treat, Mr. Green Crow is going to sing for us, and some of his people are going to dance. He's going to be ready in just a few seconds. Well, I think we're going to hear him sing a welcoming song and do one of the dances. Mr. Green Crow, are you ready? All right.
I would like to introduce our dancers, and we'll have one more dance to close out the program. We'll start with the boys here on the end. We have Timothy White Eagle, and we have Brian Blackhawk, we have Hana Green Crow, and we have Brad Blackhawk, and we have Kuna Green Crow. And over here with the women, we have my mother, Elizabeth Deer. Next to her, my wife, Betty Green Crow. And next to her, my sister, Bonnie Deer. And what's the little girl's name? Paula on the end there. Just very briefly, to explain, come over here, Kunu. Some of the costuming, these are porcupine quills. Again, we have the eagle feathers and the beadwork. Again, you see the different designs. Some of this, of course, didn't come about till maybe the 1930s, 1940s. This doesn't go back hundreds and hundreds of years, but it is typically Indian, I think. Again, we'll close out with another dance.
The American Indian Culture Series was produced by the St. Paul Public Schools Educational Television Department. KTCA TV Director is Bruce Baird.